Hello everybody, John Bornschein here, and this is Cable Lane. Today we continue part 3 in our series of how old is the earth. Now this is a critical discussion because the entire Bible is built on Genesis 1:1, and yes, the entire first chapter of Genesis. We have to know that we can trust the Bible. Was it 6 literal days for creation, 6 24-hour periods of time for creation that the Lord rested on the 7th day? Can we trust that? Because after all, the rest of the Bible and everything that we believe hangs on those fundamental truths. There's no room for macroevolution in God's created order, in the revelation as given by the Holy Bible. We have to hold it as infallible. There's no room for error here because our entire faith is built on this. And after all, there's a reason why God would create in 6 days and rest on the 7th. Our entire week, and yes, even the timeline of man, all the way to Jesus Christ, He will be the Lord of the Sabbath for 1,000 years. All of this is based on this building block of time. God is the one who even created time. And so we need to go back to Genesis chapter 1 to understand all of this. And so I want to challenge you again with, as we picked up last week, or as we ended last week rather, I challenged you with these very important points to consider. Everything hangs on the balance here because the Bible is at stake. Jesus himself quoted Genesis 25 times. So if Genesis is not accurate, then the Lord was telling us an inaccuracy. The Lord was citing a document that wasn't wholly infallible. And so yes, even his spoken word would not be credible. That's a very serious thing. The Bible is either holy truth or it is laced with lie. And if it's a lie, then the entire universe unravels before our eyes. That's how important this is to understand. It says in Luke chapter 3, verse 38, that Adam was the son of God. Not the son of a monkey, not the son of anything prior to in some primordial phase of transformation of macroevolution. No, he was the son of God. And therefore, God created, and God created with intentionality, with purpose. Let's go back to the beginning here. I want to challenge you before we really get further into the 16 points of consideration for how to refute an old earth theory. Let me just give you a little bit more of a paradigm shift, if you will. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 9 to 10, we read that God put the water into its place and makes dry land. On the very same day, in verses 11 to 13, God makes all the trees and their fruit-bearing and seed-bearing. Now, then we have to ask the question, how old were they when God made them? Well, that's kind of a rhetorical question. Well, they're not very old at all. They're made on that day, but there's the appearance of age that we haven't accounted for. You see, when they go and measure the Sierra redwoods, they look at the environment, the bark, and most certainly the number of rings inside those trees. That's how they determine whether they lived 800 or even 1,500, yes, even up to 2,000 years old. We can count the rings especially. Now, as we consider when God made these fruit-bearing and seed-bearing trees that were about to sustain life, all animal life, even the fish and mankind, they had to be fruit-bearing, they had to be seed-bearing, i.e. they had to be mature trees. So God made them already with the appearance of age. So how do you measure then if all of our standards for measurement are already skewed right away from the beginning? If they're looking to measure the number of rings inside a tree, but already the tree is the size of a redwood, where do you begin? See, already we're at a loss then if we try to use evolution, that somehow everything created from a single cell stage and that evolved over time. That's not what we see from creation. Let me give you some more examples. On the 4th day, we read that God made all the stars, the sun, the moon. That means he made all the galaxies and everything, all the lights that we would see at night, and yes, even our own sun that would govern the day. God made all of that on the 4th day. So the earth is almost finished when the rest of the universe is made. That's really the opposite of what we see from evolutionary scientists, if I can even use that term loosely there. As they make their theories, they suggest that the universe is older than the earth. And that as the Big Bang spins out all of these things across the galaxy, that somehow the earth is formed over millions, billions of years. And rather what the scripture tells us is that God is creating the earth first. He separates the lights, he makes dry land, he makes trees, he's got everything ready for the next stage in which he will bring all animal life on the earth, and then followed by mankind. And as he creates this, then he's creating the rest of the universe. That really is a spiritual, geocentric mentality there, that this is an intimate creation, that God made all of this for you. He tells us that in Isaiah 45, 12 to 18, it was all so that he could put man here. And this ultimately would serve, as we see, the role of the tribes of Israel and their intimate relationship with God. And yes, even all of the Gentile church, all of this was part of God's plan. You see, on the fifth day, it says that all creatures on the earth were formed all at once. According to Genesis 1, 20 to 24, he produced them fully formed. They weren't infant stages. They weren't hatchlings. They weren't little babies just crawling around on the face of the earth. They're fully mature animals all at once, fish and land life. And so we see that even with the strata layers of the earth. We just see this spontaneous life within the strata layers, not the missing links over millions of years. It's interesting because then we see on the sixth day, verses 26 to 28 of Genesis chapter 1, that God makes mankind, Adam and Eve. They're not a single cell formation. No, they're fully mature man and woman, created in the image of God. So as we try to look at all of this, I want to challenge you with the fact that everything that God created is already in a mature state, ready to even reproduce, ready to consume of the fruit and even of the seeds of tree life. Everything was already made with the appearance of age. That's important to understand as the baseline of all of this. Now, I bring all that up because throughout this study, as you might be considering this, and I saw some of the notes even from last week, those of you who are commenting on YouTube, even on Facebook, thank you for your comments. And Sean, you made a comment about dinosaurs specifically. We're going to talk a little bit about dinosaurs throughout this journey. As you might imagine, that's always the big discussion point. What about dinosaurs? Well, I think the issue really is about their sheer size. We'll talk about lizards here and amphibians and all sorts of created life throughout this journey. But you also have to remember that the word dinosaur didn't even come around until 1841. The New King James and the King James Bible and all the other variations thereafter, really we had the compilation of the Bible by way of the King James by 1611. And the word dinosaur doesn't even come on the scene until 1841. The Bible does speak of behemoths, and we will talk about that as well in Job chapter 40, verses 15 to 24. So there are these discussions of these large creatures on the face of the earth. But I want you to also understand here is that dinosaurs, we think about the thousands of species, and we're trying to make sense of all of that. You have to understand that there's actually only 50 primary family groups of dinosaurs. Not really that many after all. You could probably relate them to some very familiar images, like we see the Tyrannosaurus Rex or the T-Rex, as it's often called, or the Triceratops, or some of the others that are very famous, made famous by the movie Jurassic Park even. We see some of their very unique and distinguishing features, and we go, well, where are those today? Well, let me remind you that species are still dying out even today. In fact, the ivory-billed woodpecker was declared extinct just last year. In 2020, the splendid poison frog, along with the smooth handfish, both fell to extinction. And the list goes on and on. So even today, we are still losing various created life that God has made. Sometimes they're led to extinction because there's something valuable that they offer. Maybe they have a tusk, some sort of horn or antler that's very attractive, and mankind just hunted them to extinction. Certain environmental factors certainly can play into that as well. Do you know that there are 900 million dogs on the face of the earth, just give or take, a ballpark, 900 million. They come from there are about 350 different breeds of those dogs. But where did they all come from? Almost any scientist will tell you they came from wolves. So yes, within the DNA of a wolf, you even find pugs. That's right. Through various breeding practices and tactics, you can suddenly expand what came out of wolves to 350 different breeds. So we have to understand that whatever went on the boat with Noah, they didn't need all that many different types of animals, because with Noah, they certainly wouldn't have taken fully mature animals, and all you would need were a few of the species, and within their DNA, we would then see other formations of very similar life. So what you also have to understand here is that there's a very real issue with dinosaurs that often we have to take into account. We look at their size. They're massive creatures. And we think, well, they have to have existed millions of years ago. Couldn't have existed in the 6,000 years that we've been talking about thus far in this series. Well, let me remind you that fish, amphibians, lizards, and snakes will keep growing throughout their duration. In fact, as long as their environment by way of food and ecological support of that creature continues to sustain them, they will keep growing. And so can you imagine then a fish that doesn't just live a few years, but lives hundreds of years? You know, when we used to go fishing for catfish alongside the dams in Georgia, there's some power dams. And I remember as a kid, we would go through the riverbanks and we would fish for catfish. And they were rather large for me as a child. I remember they're about the length of my arm. And I thought, wow, these are huge fish. Well, then a friend of ours took us to the power dam, and he put a Cornish game hen on the end of a hook. And this is not a live game hen, mind you, but it was attached to this rather huge hook. And he dropped it at the base of this power dam. And what he pulled out of that water was a catfish that was longer than the bed of our pickup truck. Now, I don't remember anybody in our group eating it. I think he took it and probably ate it later, but I heard it didn't taste good at all. The point being is that catfish are one example of a creature that will keep growing as long as the environment is able to sustain them. Their heads will keep growing. So if there's a drought, you'll see their bodies are really small and their heads are huge because they keep growing until they die. And the same thing with lizards and amphibians and snakes. So can you imagine a lizard that doesn't just live 5 years, but lives 700 years? Or how about some alligator that you see the size of saltwater crocodiles and alligators and such. You see the massiveness of these. Imagine they don't live 30 years, but they live 800 years. That's what we're talking about. You remember in the first 1,600 years before the flood, mankind lived rather long. In fact, not only do we see the 930 years of Adam, we see 969 years for Methuselah in Genesis chapter 5. So we get mankind living a really long time. Can you imagine if the environment was so suitable that it also did the same for the animal life around Adam and all of his sons? You just can only imagine then, because it's been told to us that there's a theory that the polar axis of the earth has shifted 23.5 degrees. So if that shift took place around the time of the flood, if God just simply turned the polar axis a bit and all of the climate changed dramatically after the flood, we see that Moses will become the oldest living man at 120 years. So Methuselah at 969 years before the flood, and Moses being the oldest of the patriarchs thereafter at 120 years, and no man's outlived him. All animal life was given a cap by God. No longer would they live those long periods of time. And so the environment was more suitable as we imagined before the flood. According to Genesis chapter 2, verse 5, it says, "For the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. But a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground." So the environment was very different before the flood. So we have to take into account all of these variables and make it really fit within the paradigm here that the Bible is wholly correct. You could have rather large creatures on the earth simultaneously with man in an environment that was almost tropical-like, with a different polar axis tilt on the earth or no tilt at all. And then after the flood, everything changed. And so we'll explore all these things and more. I just wanted to at least get you thinking about the appearance of age and also environmental factors that were very different than what we experience today. So it is all very possible to have, yes, even the sheer size of dinosaurs existing on the earth at the same time mankind dwelt on the earth. And yes, all within a 6,000 year period of time. We're just getting started, brothers and sisters. I hope you've been excited, and we've got a lot more to cover in this series. God bless you.